Welcome to Larry the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, let's discuss AC/DC's 1976 international release of High Voltage. In some ways, this is a compilation album because it collects songs from the first two Australian-only releases for AC/DC, which was the Australian version of High Voltage. There's only two songs from this on the international High Voltage. You have Little Lover and She's Got Balls. And the rest of the songs on the international version are taken from the Australian T.N.T. This would be the first album that AC/DC ever released. This would be the second. In fact, the whole side one of this album, It's a Long Way to the Top, Rock and Roll Singer, The Jack, and Livewire are just like side one on here. There's only two songs on here that aren't on the international version. You have Rocker, which would show up later on the international Let There Be Rock, and you have a song School Days, which is a Chuck Berry cover. So if you've never heard this album especially, because it has a whole bunch of sort of unreleased songs, they would eventually show up later on, some of them on the 74 Jailbreak album, and then of course with like the compilation box sets that AC/DC has done, you get the rest of the songs show up in one form or another, and the song School Days on here also appears on the Backtracks compilation. All right, well, AC/DC is a band, you hear me talk about them all the time, that they were the band that really got me into hard rock and heavy metal. Started with Back in Black, and then I went back. I'm probably most fond of the Bon era, although I love the first three Brian Johnson era albums. I think those are fantastic. And this album, I decided to, I had to run some errands today. I had my original CD of it, put that in, cranked it up, and it reminded me of what a great album this is. It's very straightforward, as you would expect from AC/DC. This is George Young, Harry Vanda and George Young producing. George Young is the older brother of Angus and Malcolm. George Young had international success with a group called the Easy Beats and a hit single called Friday on My Mind. So Albert Productions, which was owned by Harry Vanda and George Young, they sort of took AC/DC under their wing and recorded a bunch of their earlier albums were recorded at Albert Productions. The production on it is very straightforward, very stripped down, but it totally works in the context of AC/DC. The guitars are all, just sounds like they put a microphone in front of a Marshall and just hit record. The drums are right there. Bond sounds great on it. The bass is maybe a little bit low. You know, you've got Mark Evans on bass. You've got Angus and Malcolm Young, of course, on guitar and rhythm guitar. Bond, legendary Bon Scott on vocals, and Phil Rudd on drums. As a side note, Mark Evans, he would be in the band up until Let There Be Rock. He would record Let There Be Rock and then would be let go from the band after that. Mark Evans has a very interesting biography that I encourage everyone to read. I forget what the exact title is of it. I should have looked it up. I lent it to somebody years ago and never got it back, so I guess that's a testament to how good it was. I had a chance to meet Mark on, we went on the Monsters of Rock cruise like 3 or 4 years ago, and he was playing bass with Rose Tattoo, who are another Australian hard rock band with various connections and ties to AC/DC, kind of coming up around the same time. I believe they were on Albert Productions too at one point. And it was sort of funny because I kept sort of just running into Mark, whether it be standing in line at the buffet, waiting for a drink at the bar or something. So I had a chance to talk to him a few times, and he even did, Rose Tattoo did like a Q&A with the audience, and a bunch of people asked Mark various AC/DC questions, but his biography is great because he goes into in-depth detail. He has a ton of funny stories about Bon and just, you know, getting into the band and, you know, the band establishing themselves, because they really started off just in Australia. Then they kind of went to London and they got established there, and then eventually they made their way to the US. But back to the album, starts with It's a Long Way to the Top. If you want to rock and roll, what a great anthem. I love that opening guitar riff. It's, you know, the sound of the guitars on this album is you might say that they're dry, but it totally works because you can just hear every like little dead note, every little pick scrape, and every little sound of them moving their hands on the guitar strings. I used to love that when I was younger, being able to hear the little squeaks and everything as they moved their hands around, the little feedback noises. That's what I always loved about AC/DC. It felt like it was, you know, live in the studio, which I'm sure to a certain extent it really was. So I love that opening rhythm guitar part there, and Angus's guitar comes in and he's just sort of holding, this is an example of this, he's holding out the note and it just sort of, you can hear it feeding back as he's waiting to come in again. Just awesome. Bond's lyrics are fantastic. Just a story of, like, you know, kind of coming up. It's a long way to the top, you know, one night stands, motels, hotels. And of course, the thing a lot of people remember about this song is that there's bagpipes in it. And the story goes that Bond, Harry Vanda and George Young knew that Bond was in a pipe band, but they didn't realize that he played drums in the pipe band. They didn't realize he didn't play bagpipes, but he had played recorder in a band called, I believe it was Fraternity, which was sort of like a very like hippie like band long before he was in AC/DC. So the fingering on a recorder is similar to the fingering on the chanter for a bagpipe. My dad plays bagpipes, so that's how I have some experience with the bagpipes. I played a little myself also. So this song, everybody remembers this for the bagpipe part in the song, which is just awesome. It has this really cool element to it. There's an old video of them on a flatbed truck driving through Sydney or somewhere in Australia, and Bond with the bagpipes under his arm. So just an amazing song. Rock and Roll Singers, another song kind of like this too. I'm going to be a rock and roll singer, going to be a rock and roll star. Because again, at this point in the band's career, they're still dreaming. They still have stars in their eyes, and it sort of comes through on a lot of the numbers on this album. Next is the Jack, which is a funny kind of innuendo with the card game lyrics and everything. You know, Bond would go on later to change the lyrics on the when he would sing it live, but here it's really cool. I love the bluesy feel of it. I love the ending where it makes it sound like they're in a club and everybody's just booing and yelling at them, you know, like they stink and everything. So I think that that's just fun. I love that AC/DC can kind of laugh at themselves. Next, Livewire with that pounding little repetitive bass note, do 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 do. The way those guitars come in real, you know, kind of quietly. This is something AC/DC doesn't get enough credit for, is how they build dynamics in songs. It's a great example of it. Just the bass and then the quiet guitars. Bond comes in, he's speaking. And I always say this, Bon Scott, I made a video a long time ago of the coolest frontmen, and of course Bon Scott was on that list. And I always say Bon Scott was so cool because when you heard his lyrics, it didn't sound like he was making it up. It sounded like it was for real, like these were stories about his life. So at the beginning of Livewire, when Bond says, if you're looking for trouble, I'm the man to see, you believe him, you know? And this song just builds great. I love the way in the guitar solo, Angus does that sort of repetitive little line, you know, the band with the hits behind him. Angus, the king of less is more style guitar playing. It's all about the groove. It's all about the feel. And then when Bond comes in the last verse and he's wailing up high, cooler than a body on ice. Now it's just great. I love it. I love the chorus in it. All right, then side two, let's see here. I'm going from, I know this album so well, I don't need to look at any notes on this. We've got T.N.T, which is just great. I love the chorus in the song. I love how on the early AC/DC stuff, you'll sometimes hear this really low voice doing like this T.N.T. You know, I'm not sure who that was in the band, but hear that in Dirty Deeds, the song Dirty Deeds done dirt cheap, and here it is in this song. I love the part where it breaks down and Bond does the T.N.T. Oh, you know, the whole band is just singing in the background. It is, I'm dynamite and I win the fight. And then the way he goes up higher and higher with each line is just great. And then it gets real chaotic at the end there, sort of exploding. Love it. Can I Sit Next to You, Girl, which is an older AC/DC track. There's actually a version of this with, I just forgot the original singer, not Rod Evans. I forget what the original singer's name was, but there's a version of this with the original singer on it. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but so Can I Sit Next to You, Girl is fun. It's got a neat, like, sort of guitar line, melody-like line in it that sort of moves around, this riff that moves around. It's really cool. Little Lover has always been a personal favorite of mine. I love the laid-back groove and Bond's, like, sly vocal, and the way the background vocals come in, they're just kind of like loosey-goosey. Let all love rise. Some guys are holding it out longer than others, and when I was a kid, man, I would put the headphones on and just listen to all these little things, and those are the things I always dug, you know, that the background vocals weren't all right with each other. They were just kind of, one guy comes in a little bit later, one guy holds it out a little bit longer. I love Bond's delivery in this, and the way the song just stops for like a few seconds, and then it just kind of comes back in on this sort of almost laid back, almost jazzy type of groove. Angus's subtle little guitar solo is great. She's Got Balls. It's got a super cool, nasty riff to it, and Bond's delivery, of course, is fantastic. And then the album ends with High Voltage, an anthemic song, big chorus to it, high voltage rock and roll, you know, which is what AC/DC is always about, is rock and roll. All right, so there you go. The international release of High Voltage for us outside of Australia. This was our first time hearing these songs. I always thought the album cover on this was awesome. Also, and you have on the back of the album, there's little like letters written to the band, and I love, you know, the one to Bond, you know, my dad's gonna tear the tattoos off your arm and everything, and I just think that's just so sort of thing, like from Malcolm from his school, or Angus, you know, about them and Malcolm and Angus in school and everything. I just thought that's just so cool there. So love it. Classic album. I put it on today. I've got the original CD, put the headphones on, and it just sounded great. Was cranking it up in my car. It sounded great. So there you go. Let me know what you guys think of High Voltage, the international release. I know I have some Aussies out there. So Akadaka, what do you remember for you guys? Did you even really hear this? I mean, you already had the other two albums before this, so this maybe never really got released here. It doesn't really mean anything to you guys who are ahead of the curve on this. But all right, so there you go. High Voltage. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.